Howdy, howdy. We are live on another Friday night to start the hashtag TQIF lineup. We're going to start things off with this live Tex-Trek podcast discussing this week's episode of Star Trek Prodigy. And then everyone who is checking us out live should go on over to the Starfleet Boy After Dark channel and see some late night fun and goodness with Starfleet Boy and friends. But in the meantime, I have Brian here and we're ready to talk about Star Trek Prodigy. So see, we have some people viewing already, so we're just gonna go ahead and get the podcast started. I'm Fathery.
I'm Brian.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 162nd installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek, old and new, and proud members of the Trek Sphere network. But today we are talking about Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, Episode 3, Starstruck. It's officially designated Episode 3, not Episode 2. Even though it's only like the second week of the show, but left it counts as 2 episodes. So that's how we're going to be counting these going forward. We're on 3 now. And I see some people in the live audience are asking about Dave. But yeah, unfortunately, Dave couldn't make it again this week, but he says that he will be here next week. So we're going to hold him to that. So hopefully we can get Dave's thoughts on Prodigy sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, me and Brian, I sure will have plenty to talk about.
No doubt.
Yeah, this episode, Starstruck, was written by Chad Quandt and directed by Alan Wan. Every time there's a new Star Trek show, there's all these like new last names behind the scenes I have to learn and new character names. It's like we get so many Star Trek shows now. There's so many things to memorize. I'm just going to read the official synopsis, then kind of expand on it with spoilers to recap the episode, and then we'll each kind of give our opening thoughts and kind of express our broad views on the episode. The official synopsis reads, even with the guidance of their hologram advisor, Janeway, the crew of the USS Protostar is tested when their ship is on a dangerous cosmic collision course. And yeah, so basically they're on this new ship, and Dal decides he's going to go away from Federation space and ends up taking the ship to a binary star system, and the ship is almost destroyed by being pulled into one of the stars and burning up. But they learn to ask Janeway for help, or I guess Dal specifically learns to ask for help, and they're able to figure out a way out and live on to next week's adventure. Brian, I'll just let you go ahead and go first if you want to give your opening statements and just tell us kind of your broad takeaway on this episode. And then we'll talk about each little beat in detail.
I like this one a lot. I liked it more than the first whatever happened last week. Because we started to dig a little deeper into the characters, and well, they were kind of painted in broad strokes. There was lots of things that needed to be done in that 1/2 episodes last week. And so they could start digging in a little bit more into who these people are beyond their cartoon stereotype nature. And I appreciated that. This is also the plot I absolutely would have done as the next episode if I'd been in charge. Was okay, now the kids do not know how to work this ship, and they get into all sorts of trouble because they don't. And I might even have done a few of those episodes, though perhaps not necessarily back to back. So yeah, I was very pleased to see that I seem to be on about the same wavelength as the writers. That it was time to show show off the ship a bit, and show off how the ship is complicated enough that you can get yourself killed if you don't know what you're doing. It turns out there's a reason for Starfleet Academy. So yeah, the extra examinations. So we got a little more complex. We finally get to see Gwen, for example, having some agency. She's not doing what her dad says. She's not doing what her captors say. She escapes, and we don't see a lot, but she gets a little bit of agency. Gets to and we start, which is where we're going to find out who she really is. I think is when we get a chance to see what she does when she has when she can make her own choices. And we got to see a different side of Zero, because Zero kind of played the person who knew what the hell was going on last time, and this time even Zero doesn't know what the hell's going on. So we see a bit different of an aspect of Zero. Rock Talk, that's the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, gets quite a few scenes to discuss and show off different aspects of her personality. And honestly, we even get to see a bit of Pog and different aspects of Pog's personality, and there's of course the major arc of it's okay for men to ask for directions arc that Dal goes Dal.
It's like
Dal.
Weird Al.
Weird Al.
But just don't say like the weird part.
Yeah,
that's how I had to tell myself to remember it.
Weird Al. Okay, so yeah, all good. I thought this I thought the show would get better than the pilot, and so far it has not disappointed.
Cool. Well, for me, I had a good time with this episode, but it did feel very small, particularly the first time I watched it. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that's going to be okay. And even on the second viewing, after I knew what to expect, I didn't really mind as much. But still, I was kind of like, oh, I waited all week for this. This is just like the tiny little episode I get. Like, it almost felt like watching like a short trek. But Discovery and especially Lower Decks are so fast-paced shows. They could fit so much story into like this 24-minute runtime. So I'm gonna have to just adjust my expectations and remember that this is going to be smaller little stories. Like, hey, we're stuck in the gravity of the star, and let's figure out a way to get out of that, and that's it. And which is fine. I think there's room for that in Star Trek, but
right. I would say after all the save the galaxy, save the universe stuff,
that's true.
It's kind of nice to have a story where it's just, can the heroes get away from the weird anomaly of the week? So
that's very true. And just my other negative was that Rock Talk was still just a couple of times felt a little too childish for me, where I don't want them to like veer off into like annoying little kid territory. But I think Rock Talk is going to be a pretty popular character, and maybe even like a bit of a divisive character, depending on how you, how annoyed you are with kids and stuff. Like, do you like really hate Anakin Skywalker, or do you just kind of get annoyed with him? So like, depending on where you fall on that spectrum, I think you might like or dislike Rock Talk at times. But I still had other moments where I did enjoy the character, and all the characters for that matter. And we for sure get to see the intent of the show here, whereas it is a device to bring new fans unfamiliar with the Star Trek universe into the fandom. This shows exactly how they're going to do that, with basically getting that Federation history lesson. It's like, oh yeah, this is going to completely explain it to a new audience, like what the Federation is, what Starfleet is. Better than, say, the JJ movies, Star Trek 09, the Kelvin timeline. It always bothered me in Star Trek 09 where they don't say like the word explore one time that entire movie when Pike's trying to explain Starfleet and stuff like a new audience. So I thought that was really cool the way that they handled that, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that throughout the show. And it was fun to see the inclusion of some real life science. That's something else that they talked about they were going to do in this show. I think Aaron McDonald is the scientific advisor on this one. And yeah, they said that they would try to, put, it's kind of hard to do in Star Trek where there is such outlandish fantasy technology, but it's always kind of meant to sound at least kind of realistic. So I think it's cool that they find ways to weave that real life science stuff in there. And I like seeing more of the ship, but I want to see even more of it. I want to see the transwarp drive or whatever the weird thing in engineering is. So I say, bring on the next episode. I'm excited and looking forward to where the show goes next.
Bit of a tangent here. Have we seen a transporter operate in this show yet?
No, but I think they're gonna explain the transporter. I think there's gonna be a moment where they like explain how a transporter works.
Well, I'm just wondering, do the bad guys have transporters? Wouldn't that
That's a good question. I don't know. They have cloaking technology apparently, so I think they might have transporters. Normally, if you're like pretty advanced in Star Trek, you figured out transporters, but maybe not. It was less common in the Delta Quadrant, wasn't it? There was a thing in like early Voyagers, like the Kazon didn't have it.
Yeah, there was definitely less common, and replicators, that was a big deal too, is who had the replicators. So I don't know. It just occurred to me that since that might be a something of a surprise for the audience that the bad guys don't have transporters, but it also, from a storytelling point of view, especially if you've only got 30 minutes to do your story, transporters save a lot of time, so they'll probably want to give them that just so that they can move things along quickly. Though landing a shuttle is much more visually interesting than beaming down, and this show loves to be visually interesting. So,
Oh, and just one last thing. I'll say, like, we talked about how last week how it felt a little bit more like the other Star franchise than Star Trek, at least visually. I guess tonally too, but this for sure felt more Star Trek to me.
I definitely did not feel Star Wars at all. There's large hunks of techno babble and exposition in this, and there's even some character development that all kind of, the action sequences definitely took a backseat to all of that stuff in a way that they weren't taking a backseat in the first two episodes.
Cool. Well, we're just going to go ahead and move on into the episode breakdown, and we're going to cover every little beat and take a deep look at the writing, the story, the cool little Star Trekian technology and stuff, and then eventually we'll even go into our Gorn egg section where we talk about all the in jokes, Easter eggs, and continuity connections. But just to start things off, with the opening of the episode, we pick up where last week ended with the kids on the ship getting to know Janeway and getting to know the Protostar and having to figure out what to do with Gwen, their prisoner. Janeway gives the kids a Federation / Starfleet 101 tutorial. Self-appointed Captain Dal sets a course to a red dot on the holomap away from Federation authorities, and the kids lock up the boss's daughter in the brig. So, Brian, what do you think of some of this early stuff in the episode? One of the things that stood out to me was just getting to see a little bit more of the ship, even though they're similar or the exact same sets, I guess, is what we saw last week. We do get some additional ones too, and this is kind of this is that scene that they showed us a few weeks ago when they did that clip that they released during New York Comic Con.
They also linger on the sets of the ship more. In the first movie, it was so JJ-ified that we didn't have a lot of time to look at the sets. We were too busy, getting on with the story and running and jumping and exploding things. And this time, we get to do some nice camera sweeps across rooms and corridors, or I don't know what junction squares. I don't know what you call those things. I guess one thing I noted, we have several Alpha Quadrant species. None of them apparently have seen a human before. Is strongly implied.
Yeah, Jinkum Pog was like, "Why is her forehead so smooth?" Because that's like the thing about humans is that humans don't have any like weird bumps or ridges on their head. But I guess you could say the same thing about like Orions or Betazoids or a bunch of other species. But it showed that Janeway knows how to handle these different species though, because she knows like, oh, Tellarites, they love to be confrontational. So she was like, you're no spring peach either, Tellarite.
Or
summer peach. You're no summer peach.
Yeah. We do see that our kids can be at least Pog can be a bit racist or speciesist, I guess. I don't know if Tellarites and humans can interbreed or not. So, but yeah, I do like Gwen trying to see if she can trick the computer into following her instructions by jumping. No, I'm the captain. See if she can get this to work.
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I mean, normally for that person's tied up, clearly not the captain, but this is a computer. It might be really stupid. You might be able to just call dibs on it, and suddenly, you're the captain, and it doesn't work. But I did like the attempt. Felt nicely smart on her part.
Well, how self-aware do you think this Janeway hologram is? Because the first time I watched it, I was thinking that she was less self-aware than, say, the Doctor from Voyager. She's more on the level of like a typical hologram that just doesn't know that they're a hologram. Even though like this is clearly a case where she does, but she doesn't have like that sentient level of intelligence.
Yeah.
But then the second time I watched it, I'm like, oh, I think she's actually like a little smarter than she's leading on. Like she knows that these kids aren't cadets, but she's just saying that is what I think. That's my theory right now.
Well, no, that was the question I came away from watching this the first time was either is Holo Janeway rather dim, as you would expect a holographic computer program to potentially be. And it just kind of accepts whatever input it gets unless some sort of security alarm is tripped. Or is she smarter and she's fooling all of them? Rewatching it, the one point I thought on that point to mention on that discussion or on that debate is not sleeping on the camera. She encourages them to lie to her. Now, if she doesn't know they're lying, then that's fine. But if she knows they're lying, she is deliberately encouraging them to spin a bullshit tale. Oh, you must be cadets. And basically gives them an out so that they don't have to explain themselves or justify themselves, which then only makes sense. Either A, she's too dim to realize they're lying to her, or B, she already knows all about them. She doesn't need them to explain themselves because she already knows who these people are and what they're about. And so it doesn't limit her or cause any problems for her to redirect the conversation away from them explaining themselves and instead give them an out to lie so that they feel more comfortable. So I'm like, so she's either behind behind on the game, or she's like 10 steps ahead of them. There's no in between here. I do think she was caught off guard by the diverting power thing. I don't think that was part of her evil plan, but I think that sideswiped her. But I think, and I kind of feel like they want Janeway to be smart and not a dumb thing that can easily be fooled by the kids who just know how to talk to the computer in the right way and could Captain Kirk's school of computer repair Janeway into doing whatever they want. I don't think they want Janeway to be that, given that they cast Kate Mulgrew and as Janeway decorated captain, they don't want her looking dumb on screen. I don't think.
And I don't think Kate Mulgrew would want to do that either.
Yeah,
she's very proud of the character of Janeway, and she would want the character represented well.
Yeah, and whatever my misgivings about Voyager are, I don't want to just see them bring Janeway back to shit on her. So I think that on balance, I'm now hoping that Janeway's 10 steps ahead of them, because that is certainly the more interesting and some satisfying version of events.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. And also, as I pointed out in my opening statement, I appreciated the description, the explanation for Starfleet and the Federation both here. Just the way that they worded it in just a couple of sentences. I just want to read these quotes. She says, the Federation is an interstellar union of different worlds and different species with shared principles of universal liberty, rights, and equality. And then she describes Starfleet as... Starfleet is the Federation's representatives for deep space exploration on a mission to maintain peace and freedom, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. That was cool because we've heard William Shatner say the boldly go stuff. We've heard Patrick Stewart, and we've heard, who else? Scott Bakula. We've never heard it from Kate Mulgrew. All the Kelvin kids got to say all that stuff. We heard it from Chris Pine. We've heard it from Nimoy. But so I thought that was cool that they were able to sneak that in. Because I like that being a kind of a, it's like the most iconic thing in Star Trek, really. To boldly go where no one's gone before. Yeah. That's the catchphrase.
And I guess it's the charter, according to Into Darkness, I think. Mm-hmm. So it is, if you're trying to explain Starfleet, quoting the charter actually makes a lot of sense. So it works in an in-universe level. It also is very solid.
And it's come up on Discovery at some point, I believe, but I don't remember the exact context off the top of my head.
Yeah. I guess I'll put this here because I appreciate the attention to detail. As far as all their little continuity bits and bobs, and especially their technobabble in this episode and in the last episode too, for the most part, is fairly well thought out and researched on a level, well beyond what say a special like Discovery would tend to be, and a lot of other Star Trek has tended to be. They really went out of their way to research the bits and bobs that they quote about how the universe works and how the ship works, and get that all right on a level that I think a lot of live action Star Trek writers never grasped. I appreciated the fact that the Federation is back in the Beta Quadrant. In the 90s Trek, it seemed like the Beta Quadrant had vanished, and the Alpha Quadrant, the Federation and the Klingons and the Romulans and the Dominion and the Cardassians were all in the Alpha Quadrant and only the Alpha Quadrant, whereas all the star maps and the invention of quadrants in the first place had been based on the idea that the Federation spanned both the Alpha and the Beta Quadrants.
Yeah, so it's like a 50-50 split down the middle of the Federation. Earth is in the Beta Quadrant like half the year, and then in the Alpha Quadrant the other half.
Is it? Oh, wow. I did not know about that detail.
Actually, Teller Prime and Doria and Vulcan, I think, are all three on the Beta side.
Yeah. I knew the line went through Earth's system, but I didn't know it went so close to Earth's system that it would change depending on the time of year. That sounds confusing, but
yeah, I don't think they say the words Beta Quadrant the entire 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine. I bet it's mentioned fewer than 3 times, if at all, that entire show.
So I appreciated that's an example, but they got lots of little details right about how systems would work and stuff. And you don't need to get this stuff right, especially for a kids show that's training kids up for shows that are not going to be trying as hard for the most part to get this stuff right. But yeah, they got it. And it made me think of the Doctor Who, the quote Douglas Adams said about writing Doctor Who. He said, you have to, I'm pretty something pretty close to. You have to keep the story complex enough that the kids will be interested and entertained, but simple enough that the adults can still follow it. And
I love that quote.
yes, it's one of my favorite quotes about Doctor Who, and I think that we're seeing some of that here. The people are realizing kids are going to sweat all these details on a level that, you know, a lot of adults are not going to sweat them. So they seem to be putting more effort into them. And I appreciate that, as I'm somebody who's still enough of a kid at heart to at least make note of when they get the details right and when they get them wrong, even if I no longer sit there with a Nerf gun shooting sucker darts at my TV every time somebody says something wrong. But yeah, so I appreciate that and that's kind of starts with Janeway's speech about the Federation and runs all the way through this episode, and I hope they keep it up.
Now, one thing I wanted to point out about Dal's mistrust of authority is I'm slightly mixed on that, but I think I overall really like this idea, because that's one of the things that speaking of that other Star franchise I keep mentioning, one of the things that I like over there, when they do so many stories that are like anti-authority, that the evil empire against the underdogs. And that's something that Star Trek has kind of lacked, because it is like this greater, better society in the future. So of course, like, the authority would be less malevolent, although they still have to defy orders quite often in Star Trek. So I kind of like this show Prodigy kind of having that anti-authority vibe. I kind of feel conflicted about if, like, the arc is about Dal having to learn, like, oh no, like, it's okay to, like, trust the status quo and, fall in line, and the government's never going to lie to you, and the Federation is perfect and you should buy into all the propaganda. But I think that the way that they're, at least early on, they're using the diviner and his mining slavery operation as kind of the authority that they're in defiance of. So I think it's going to be like a little bit more nuanced, where it's like, okay, like, the Federation is good, but the diviner is bad, and sometimes authority is good if we make it be good, and even then you still gotta disobey orders from time to time. But I like that overall. I'm slightly mixed, but overall I like it. I like the idea of he's so jaded and so cynical, even at, like, this early age. He's like, no, we can't roll up in a stolen ship. Are you nuts? Like, they're going to be mad at us. They're going to hate us. They're going to lock us up again. We just got our freedom. You want to throw it away? People in authority lie. We can't trust anything they say. And then the irony of Zero pointing out that Dal lies all the time. But no, I like where this is headed, and I think it's going to be cool to see the arcs with these characters. And as they learn more about the Federation, Jankum Pog and Zero and Rock Talk were all like, man, the Federation sounds really sweet. Like, I want to be part of this. This all sounds good. Dal's the only one who's skeptical. Well, we don't know Gwen's opinion, but I don't think she was very receptive given the situation.
No, I had pretty much the same thought, is that the Federation stands as a probably impossibly good as an impossibly good example of government and the man that is not terribly realistic. And so, on one hand we have Dal saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the lesson, the knowing is half the battle, kids kind of moments, that's actually a lesson kids should probably be paying attention to and thinking about and keep in mind. But it flies in the face of Star Trek, which does have this kind of impossibly good Federation. And so you're in the situation where, if you're a regular Star Trek viewer, that Dal is wrong on this particular example anyway. but that he's generally following a pretty good rule of thumb, that the people on top don't care too much about the people on the bottom. So yeah, where is it? It certainly. I don't know if the writers just hadn't quite thought out the implications of this, or if we're going to end up with a more nuanced situation. Certainly, they've also been showing that the Federation is a little more flawed than we thought, but in other Star Treks lately as well. So, but yeah, I don't. It feels like they're setting up one of those kids learn an important lesson moments, but it's hard to see how you get out of this without the kids learning potentially the wrong lesson. So.
Yeah, Starfleet Boy is joining us in the live audience, and he's saying in the comments, kids need the optimism and the security. I think we can't have bad morals on Prodigy. I think kids could handle that. I think kids could handle betrayals and having to go against the boss sometimes. The other thing I wanted to point out is they remind us that Zero cannot read Gwen's mind, and apparently he couldn't read the Diviner's mind either, because he said last week, I didn't really know what he was using me for, why he wanted me to like torture those people, or what his like master plan is. So I guess it's something with like their species, the Vodna Akat, or whatever they were called last week. So I'm glad that they took the time to dot the I's and cross the T's and tell us, like, why doesn't Zero just read her mind and learn what her dad's evil plan is and all this stuff? And it's like, oh yeah, because he can't. So at least they acknowledge that.
Do the kids even care about the Diviner's evil plan at this point?
That's true.
Yeah, we got a ship, we're out of here. That's yesterday's problem. So they don't know he's coming after them. Well, I mean, she keeps saying he's coming after them, but I don't know if they actually believe it, or believe that there's a way for them for the Diviner to find them. So
Brian, do you want to? I'm sorry. Did you have something else on that?
Oh no.
Do you want to tell us about the kids getting to know the ship?
Sure. Yes. So Dahl and Zero lock up Gwen in the brig, and then check out the living arrangements for the Protostar's crew. Rocktalk and Jankum Pog hit up the mess hall. Then, finally, Zero and Jankum Pog look over the dual warp core and the mystery thing in engineering.
So what's going on in engineering with this weird, I guess it's propulsion related, being that it's like right in the middle between two warp cores. And why do they have two warp cores side by side? Is like one the backup? Pog does say we only need one to hit warp 9.
Yeah, and then both of them are running. Admittedly, starships of this era can, especially the sleeker ones, can seem to be able to go significantly past warp 9 these days. So I suppose, but they could have just built one warp core that would push a ship this size past warp 9. Instead, they built two. They both seem to be running, unlike the secondary warp core on Voyager, which was basically just sitting in basically a very long, thin closet in case they needed it. Whereas here it's wired into the system very clearly, connecting the matter and the antimatter together. And seems operational. We know when those things aren't running, they don't light up. So yeah, that is intriguing, and the big thing in the middle is intriguing. I'm sure it ties in with the deployable nacelle thingy we see in the opening credits. Yeah. That's
which
gotta
may
be
or may not be transwarp related based on what we saw in a console previously.
Yes. Probably, since if that showed up on a console, because I don't know what else you would be doing with an extra fancy engine. This is another engine, but it makes our ship go slower. No, obviously it makes the ship go faster.
I know that Lower Decks got Mike Okuda to work on some of the displays and Okudagram LCAR layouts. I don't know if he's contributing to Prodigy or not, or if they're just trying to make it look like Okuda's style. But there is some pretty interesting visuals on some of the consoles and stuff. I like how much detail they're able to pack in.
I would say that this is sort of somebody trying to do an evolution of 90s Okudagrams.
It looks a little more advanced, I guess.
Well, I don't know if advanced, just it's it's reminiscent, but there's also a lot of new shapes and new ways of joining shapes together that you don't see on classic Akudagrams. So it feels to me like it's, this is Windows 10 versus Windows 6 or something, kind of Akudagrams. Recognizable, but clearly a different iteration. And given when we have been told this show is set, it would make sense that they would be a little more evolved or altered.
The brig that they have Gwen locked up in is very Star Trek Into Darkness. It also felt a little Discovery, like the size and shape of it.
I did want to mention that the brig, the prisoners get better accommodations than the crew do by a significant margin. That room is way bigger than any other. I think any other brig we've seen, even the Star Trek Into Darkness brig, I don't think was that big.
Because that one was pretty big.
It was pretty big, but I don't think it was quite that big. And so and given how small this relatively small this ship is, I'm still thinking it's got the space for at least 7 decks, 7 or 8 decks, but these decks seem to be really tall. So it might not actually have that many because the decks are so much taller than most Starfleet ships. But given how small this ship is, they sure spend a lot of space making sure they can lock people up. And I
guess they were planning on having a bunch of prisoners packed in there.
Yeah, or rebellious crew members or something. I probably reading too much into this. It probably they just wanted a cool looking brig and they didn't think about what it said about the nature of the ship when that large of a percentage of your ship is devoted to locking people up. But it's certainly certainly if you think about it for a bit, it feels like that's a huge amount of space to devote to locking people up. And they have a separate room. And is there more than one cell or just one cell? I couldn't tell watching it if there was another cell off on the other side of that column on the right.
It looks like there could be, but I don't think we get a glimpse of it. I don't recall seeing a glimpse of it, but I also wasn't looking for it.
Yeah. And they've got a big room that acts as kind of the warden's room, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. And even if that doubles as the chief of security's office, it's still
Odo style.
Yeah. It still strikes me as a whole lot of space being devoted to imprisonment on a ship this size, when like on Kirk's Enterprise, the brig often was just open directly into a hallway.
Jill in our audience, or a Hollow Nanny, as she is calling herself today. Hi, Jill, but she's laughing at the fact that Murph pooped on Zero's eye, but I think it was it came out the other end. It was like a jelly vomit. It came dripping out of his mouth.
There are a lot
Murph's
of
not a good roommate.
There are a lot of simple creatures that use their mouth for a poop hole too. That is not when you get down to really microscopic critters and stuff, that is not all that uncommon. So
maybe that's the case with Murph. I really liked the captain quarters the first time I saw it. I was like, oh, that looks like pretty sleek and cool, and I want to live there. And then the second time I watched it, I was like, for like a captain's quarters, like, couldn't they like throw in like some carpet or something, make it a little like that 24th century coziness,
Wow, I had the exact opposite reaction. I said, well, so much for all that Federation equality. We see how the crew sleeps and we see how the captain sleeps. And you could have had, there's again, a huge amount of space devoted to the captain that could have been allocated to the crew that was not. Whereas I suppose when you need a brig, you really frickin' need a brig. The captain probably does not need a room quite this ridiculously ostentatious, while the rest of the crew is sleeping on bunk beds in a cargo bay.
I have a theory on that, because I thought the same thing. And I'm wondering if this is a training ship that's kind of intended for cadets. And that's why they're given shittier living conditions than the captain, because like the captain's just there to be like the drill sergeant, and then they're there to be going through training.
I mean, these crew members don't even get a hallway.
They don't get a lower decks hallway. It is very Star Trek 6 though. It looked like the Excelsior bunk room.
Yeah. The bridge is way bigger than it needs to be, like vastly bigger. So loads of space wasted on the bridge, loads of space wasted on the captain's quarters, loads of space wasted on the brig, and then the crew quarters, they're literally bunk beds in a cargo bay. So it's
and they don't even get a
choice.
bar in their mess. Well, it makes sense because they're kids, but on the Cerritos, at least they have like a bar in their mess hall, but not here.
I suppose I'm kind of fine with the bar being dispensed with, given how small the ship is and how advanced the replicator tech is, that if they wanted a bar, they could put one together in probably about 45 minutes or something, or 47 minutes. The replicator knows exactly what Pog is ordering. So Pog doesn't know what a human is, even though he's a Tellarite, but the replicator knows exactly what food Pog was raised on, or at least has been exposed to in some fashion.
The blood truffle biscuits, sweet radish pie, and sour gravy. Didn't look very appetizing to me, but he seemed to enjoy it. I thought that was a cute little moment though with Rock Talk, where she's like, the only thing I know how to eat is Nutrigoop that they fed us back in prison. That's all I've ever ate. That was so sad.
Yeah, no, it was one of the things I liked, is that Rock Talk gets a lot of little moments throughout the whole episode.
Yeah,
and that was one of them that I enjoyed. They've reversed the table, the silliness of the tables from Voyager, which in Voyager they have a trench running down the table for no discernible reason, that you can accidentally set your cup down wrong and spill it because of the trench. This one has a wall. Yes, a wall running down the middle of your table that you can use to spill your cup.
But that makes a little bit more sense, because it's like a divider. If like I'm eating on one side and someone else is eating on the other side, it's like you stay on your side and I'll stay on mine.
Yeah, I suppose they knew they were going to have kids on board who would, get really immature, shoving trays back and forth at each other.
But yeah, it was cool to get like a little tour of the ship. I said last week that I wanted to see more of the interiors. I wanted to see engineering. I'm curious if there's a sick bay. If there is, I want to see it.
I'll be really upset if there's a brig but no sick bay. That's all kinds of fucked up from a Star Trek a Federation point of view.
If there is a sick bay,
up, we can't fix a broken leg, but we can lock people up.
Wouldn't it be cool if there's an EMH on board also? If there's a sick bay.
Yeah, I don't know I mean, the example we have on on La Serena is that you get the same hologram no matter which type of hologram you call up, but that isn't necessarily Starfleet standard there. But yeah, there could be an EMH. One would think if they went to the trouble of putting a Janeway on board, that they would load Janeway's famous EMH version of that on board as well. But Picardo hasn't announced anything about being on the show, I don't think.
Yeah, so I'll be disappointed if we don't have him back in something at some point soon. He seems like an easy one to bring back.
Yeah.
And I guess the only other thing of note here before we get to the binary star stuff is Rock Talk does try to be nice to Gwen. She does, bring her a big plate of steaming Nutrigoop that looked disgusting. But she is also questioning Gwen, like, how come you never did anything? Like, she doesn't understand. She's just like a little kid. She has this little kid brain. She's like, why were you doing all that bad stuff? Why didn't you do anything to stop it? And Gwen kind of has to, take a look at the girl in the mirror and be like, oh yeah, like I didn't really know. And
wait a minute, am I the bad guy?
Yeah, the meme. They're like, are we the baddies? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, when the little girl's like, why did you imprison me and force me to work when I hadn't committed any crimes? And am I the bad guys?
Yeah, like what kind of crimes do you think these 8-year-olds are doing, yo?
Yeah. And that also, apparently, it sounds like these Alpha Quadrant sampler pack that we got of Medusans and Tellarites and purple guys who were taught to speak English. They all came from different places, it sounds like. I had a sort of head canon that we were going to find out that the diviner had like captured the children of the ship's crew or something, and that's why all these Alpha Quadrant people were in the Delta Quadrant working in this prison. But it sounds like they're from all over the place and just being shipped here to Space Australia. And
Botany Bay.
which raises the question then of even more of how did all these Alpha Quadrant species end up out in the Delta Quadrant, if they were on multiple, apparently implied multiple different worlds or planets. So yeah, I'm definitely trying to put these clues together to figure out how it all fits together. And I'm getting lots of clues, but I don't know if any overall picture is necessarily emerging at this point. Hopefully it will make sense once we get the explanations. So.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the name of the game on all the Star Trek shows now. It's like I want to have this explained to me. Like why is this? Why is there this mystery of this?
That is
like,
the
why does Mariner have a different last name than her mom and dad?
Yeah, that is the end result of J.J. Abrams' mystery boxes.
Oh, there you go.
So.
Well, let's talk about the arrival at the binary star.
Mm-hmm.
Red alert! The ship arrives at its destination and is caught in the gravity of binary stars. While trying to troubleshoot the danger, Dal inadvertently deactivates power to the brig, freeing Gwyn. Rock Talk is on the case, though, and fights Gwyn in the shuttle bay to stop her escape attempt. So yeah, we get to see another location in the ship. We get to see the shuttle bay. I guess we get to see the escape pods too. That made me mad, Brian, when Dal is like, get rid of everything non-essential, everything that's not bolted down, eject it. And they're like ejecting all these cargo containers, or maybe they were escape pods. But it made me mad because like you just got this cool shit with all this neat stuff on it. Now you're just like dumping it. Like you don't even know what you're dumping.
Yeah. I want Janeway to take them down and say, for this is a mission to a dangerous planet. I recommend that you take the phasers found in Cargo Bay 3, and they go in this Cargo Bay 3 is empty.
But I mean,
we jettisoned all the phasers.
Hey, they have a lot of power. They got those 2 warp cores, right? So I guess they have like some long-term replicator capabilities. You know, we have the vehicle replicator, so I guess they can just replicate all the new equipment, new escape pods, whatever they need. The vehicle replicator is really cool. In the fight, the way that they used it in the fight, you mentioned the interesting visuals earlier, but that was neat. The way that they're fighting while this shuttlecraft is being built, and the stars look neat.
Yes, they're definitely very pretty stars. So the I guess I noticed that they aren't trying to do. There seems to be zero effort to imitate Majel Barrett for the computer's voice, which I think is a first for this era of Trek.
Oh well, we have Geek Filter in the audience, and he is actually friends with the woman who does the voice of the computer on the show. So Aaron, if you can remind us who that is, because the name escapes me. But yeah, I noticed this is the first time we hear the ship's computer. But on the on lower decks, they have the Cerritos computer is also a different.
Oh, okay. I just hadn't caught that it wasn't trying. They weren't trying to do, because I know they had a couple, at least one, if not 2, Majel Barrett replacements back in the 90s. So there are people that can do the voice reasonably well, but I guess it just never sunk in that they dumped it by the on the Cerritos.
Yeah. So this show they have Bonnie Gordon, but one thing I've noticed ever since this new era of Star Trek started is every ship has its own computer voice. You know, in Discovery, the USS Discovery has a different voice than the Enterprise. But every time they have the Enterprise, they have the same. It's the woman who played Vasquez in Aliens. She does the voice of the computer every time they have the Enterprise in Short Treks or in Discovery, and I'm guessing they'll keep her for Strange New Worlds, but they use someone totally different for the Discovery in Discovery.
Yeah, well, it's only because, you know, Voyager, the Enterprise D, Deep Space Nine, and the Defiant all had you know, an attempt, either Majel Barrett or an attempt at Majel Barrett, and I think the shuttlecraft did as well, all the shuttles for those various shows that it felt and I think think they didn't they had the Enterprise E must have talked at some point, right?
Probably, but I can't think of an exact moment.
Yeah. Doing a countdown or something, if nothing else. But so yeah, it just struck me as, yeah, they're definitely doing a different voice here, which is fine. I mean, they change everything else about Starfleet. Why should the computer voices be standard? I honestly just would have had the computer voice be Janeway. I would have had Kate Mulgrew do the countdowns and the red alerts and everything on the ship. But I think that would have been fine getting in this context where she's clearly wired into the system and not walking around with a mobile emitter. So,
well, apparently Bonnie Gordon is really nice and a big Trek fan, and she's very friendly on Twitter. So if you're listening to this, go give her a follow on Twitter and tell her that the Tex-Trek boys sent you and say hi. But Brian, I think you know quite a lot about astronomy and probably much more than me. So let me ask: I do know that binary star systems are actually very common in the observable universe. Are they typically a white dwarf and a red giant? It's like this little hungry white dwarf feeding off of this massive red giant.
I don't know how typical that is. I don't honestly. I'm not into things well enough to say whether that is common or not. I do know that things like that happen, that we have telescope images of one star ripping another star apart slowly over, a million years or something. And creating images is somewhat similar to this. So, the basic idea of this is more plausible than most of the anomalies of the week that we've gotten in the whole history of Star Trek. This is actually, pretty possible. I assume there must have been some planets in this system. Otherwise, where are the rocks coming from?
Yeah,
the stars
I don't think there'd be like a bunch of rocks floating around in that close proximity, but that's was the cool excitement of having, later when they're having to like fly through those and stuff. And
yeah, I mean, there could be some debris left over from some sort of supernova billions of years ago that coalesced, the gases of which coalesced into these two new stars. So it seemed fairly plausible. I did sort of headcanon that the weird gravity of these stars was interfering with their ability to generate subspace fields, which is why the impulse engines were performing so incredibly poorly, and why ramping up the warp drive might have been a bad idea. Is that because the impulse engines actually use a subspace field to lower the mass of the ship, so that even though it looks like a huge ship and tiny little impulse engine, from a mass point of view, it's like 95% impulse engine and only a little bit of ship, the rest of the ship, and all the fuel is compacted into a tiny little thing from a mass point of view, not a volume point of view. But so it's like the whole ship is made out of a hollow styrofoam shell, and the impulse engine is this giant hunk of metal, pushing the ship. But if that subspace field gets interfered with, suddenly all that mass comes back. Suddenly your ship is way heavier and your impulse engine performs like shit. So without that subspace driver. So it was pretty easy for me to say, yeah, there's probably weird star stuff always seems to come with weird subspace stuff in Star Trek land. So the I liked the divert all power thing had all sorts of consequences.
yeah, like you can tell, like they're not diverting all power correctly, because typically when you divert all power, like you would know like not to power down your brig. Like no other Star Trek show would someone make this mistake. Not even on Lower Decks would they goof that up.
This show also has the holodecks using the same power system as the rest of the ship, unlike Voyager, which stupidly had its own separate power generators for the holodecks, which made no sense. But here, that in a much more logical sense, the training hologram disappears when you divert all power. It's actually a very deconstructionist thing to do, which I was not expecting for a kid's cartoon, to be taking the great totems and tropes of Star Trek and taking them apart and showing potential flaws. That's sort of what you do in like Picard. Picard is a very deconstructionist take on Star Trek, where you're kind of digging in and saying, how well does this actually work? How and what would these tropes really work like if you push them to the limit? So I loved it because I liked the idea that they paid attention to it. So many writers in Star Trek just, oh yeah, divert all power, that works fine. And they're like, no, this would cause serious problems if you diverted all power instead of like all available power or some such thing. And I just love that they switched off Janeway accidentally. That is another thing that lesser Star Trek writers would have omitted and not caught altogether. Is that probably would switch off the hologram. So yeah, well done there. Again, good techno babble. And yes, a trained crew would know better than to switch off this, that, and the other systems, but these are not a trained crew, and they're probably literally just asking the computer to do the things. I doubt they're even like reconfiguring stuff most of the time. Most of the time, they're probably just typing in divert all power to impulse engine, hit return. Are you sure you want to do this? Confirm. It does, because the computer can easily interpret text or verbal speech and translate it into into orders and actions at this point. So how are they sometimes able to work the ship and other times not? I just assume they're just literally typing in what they want the computer to do and hitting return. The computer says, well, if you're sure.
And even Gwen seemed to have like some abilities when she's running around on her own. Like she was able to find where the escape pods were, and then she's able to the computer offers is like, hey, you don't have any escape pods, you want me to build you a shuttlecraft? And she's like, yeah, let's do that. And then when she's in the shuttle bay fighting Rock-Talk, she's able to deactivate the gravity. So
Yep.
I guess there's some user-friendly interface with some of the stuff, but yeah, they still don't really know what they're doing. The one thing that annoyed me with that fight with Rock-Talk, by the way, is I wanted to see the shuttle design. I wanted to get like a good wide shot look of it, and we only see these like little tight shots that are only on screen for a couple seconds. But it was cool how scary they made Rock-Talk look. I really appreciated the design because she doesn't really change much. It's not like her eyes glow red or anything when she's mad. It's still like that same pink Rocky face, and they can make it be this cute little innocent character and also make it be like the scary rage monster that is gonna stomp your ass into the ground.
I like that she was still a little girl and not just the Hulk or something when she gets upset. It was, she's not always sweet and innocent and kind. Sometimes she's pissed off and she knows you're full of shit, and she'd never say the S word, but that doesn't mean she's going to let you walk all over her. She will throw a nice little tantrum and beat the shit out of you.
Full of Nutrigoop.
Yeah. And though the worst damage that Rock-Talk ends up doing, I'm pretty sure, is unintentional when she lands on her. Lands on Gwen. I was like, oh my God, that must have hurt. She's at first I thought, wait, there are only 3 escape pods, but I thought, well, wait a minute. Escape pod holds like some escape pods hold 6 people and some hold 8 people, according to various Starship manuals that have been published by Rick Sternbach and stuff. And that would cover probably the crew of the ship. You would only need 3 escape pods if there are 8-man escape pods.
And there could have been more. That could have just been that deck. That could have been like one side of the ship, and there's 3 more on the other side, or something like that.
I guess it felt like that announcement of launching Escape Pod 1, launching Escape Pod 2, or whatever was sounded. I got the impression that was ship wide, but I might not have been it. But again, you don't need more than 3. And at first I was like, oh no, now they have no escape pods, but they have a shuttle replicator. It can probably replace just about everything they jettisoned. I guess if they jettisoned their bulk matter storage, which is what the replicator takes apart and uses to make things, if they jettisoned that,
Hopefully they
going
didn't
to
do
have
that.
they're
They're
going
gonna have
to-
to go find. They're gonna have to go tractor it and hope it didn't burn up yet. And
Yeah, well, I mean, they could just go find some rocks and fill it up. It doesn't really matter what matter it is, as long
I
as
guess
you've
it's
got
anything that's
something
pretty
there.
dense.
Yeah, it's like Mr. Fusion. So yeah, rocks, asteroids, nickel iron asteroids would probably be just about as effective. But yeah, I and yes, I like the shuttle fight as well. I think the lack of getting to see the shuttle properly was a deliberate tease designed to annoy people like us who want to see the frickin' shuttle. I did notice it had the clear top like the ship does. You know how shuttles always echo their ships in the shows?
Oh yeah, like
And this one
on
had a
lower
giant
decks.
bubble dome wrapping over the whole top of it.
Do you remember that they gave the shuttles on the Cerritos style, really round nacelles, and then the Titan shuttles had the Luna class looking advanced nacelles.
Oh, okay. I not noticed that, but yes.
So yeah, it does look the same kind of transparent canopy on the top. It looks cool. Like it kind of makes it look more like it might be like a jet plane looking thing, like this clear cockpit on the top. I don't know. It looks like it'd be different, and I can't really judge it because I haven't seen it other than these little teases. But yeah, I'm sure we will see it eventually later this season.
Go back one slide or two slides. I want to see that keypad. That is not an acoudogram. That is a control panel we have never seen on a Starfleet, any modern 90s era, 24th century starship control panel.
It looks a bit more TOS than anything else because it's just a bunch of colorful, unlabeled buttons. Even though they're all the same color.
Yeah, they don't even bother labeling it. It almost makes me wonder, was the graphic done? Because everything else is so over designed and this is so simplistic. Did they just not, they run out of time and figured, well, screw it. It doesn't have to look that good. Or
this is the one maybe it was never so short. But
maybe it was never supposed to get a close up. And then late in the day, they added the close up to make it more clear what was going on. And the console, when they designed it, they weren't expecting close ups. So.
Well, Brian, do you want to tell us what happens when the gravity goes down and the desperation they encounter?
Gwen disables the gravity, causing chaos on the bridge. Dal eventually sees he is in over his head, finally, and reactivates Hollow Janeway to ask for help. She is able to coach them to safety, and Rock Talk recaptures Gwen. Which I think that's got to feel bad for Gwen when like the 6-year-old captures you.
Yeah, I think Gwen might be the oldest, or at least she seems like the smartest and most capable. She speaks all these different languages. She's a pretty good hand-to-hand combatant with her little programmable matter sword thing. And then like the dumb little kid brings you down.
Yeah. It is probably just the inevitable benefits of being raised by the guy who's at the king of the hill and gets their kid all the education opportunities versus everyone else who grows up mining mystery crystal. So but yeah, she does seem certainly more educated than anyone else. Zero's pretty smart too.
That's true. By the way, how does Zero know like Earth measurements? He says that there's trillions of tons of white hot ionized gas, and I like that they explain like what a star is in real life science to your youthful audience. But like, how does he know tons? Like that's like a.
I just took that as universal translators converting it into English for us. So
there's actually instances where that makes sense if that's how the universal translator works and other things. Because a lot of times you hear aliens say like in 5 hours and stuff like that. Like, how do you know these units of measurement?
Yeah, I mean a day probably translates pretty clearly, but yeah, hours are pretty random. That wasn't based on anything in particular.
And I liked that. Dow asked Murph, like, do you have any ideas? Because last week, Murph was the one who like figured out where the pew 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 button was. So it's like, does Murph actually like know the ship? Is Murph actually like this really intelligent thing? But like, no, he's just trying to eat the captain's chair while they're all moments away from death.
Murph figures that if Murph eats the captain's chair, then Murph will be the captain because no one else can sit in the chair.
Well,
So,
I guess you get it last.
or want some sort of communal leadership, democratic leadership system where there are no authority figures, and it's going to go down and eat the captain's quarters next, so that everyone is equal.
But also, what you said about Zero being smart, he is the one that figures out, oh yeah, the secret is to go along with the river of fire, as they call it. But yeah, let's just ride the gravity and slingshot around the star.
Yeah. I did like you get to push the button.
When Jankom gets to blow stuff up, even though it's just like auto-targeting the asteroids. And it'd still be fun to shoot the phasers.
They've always been auto-targeting, but I don't think most of the writers realize. I think most of the writers think that when Worf's back there pushing buttons, it's like some sort of arcade game, but where he's moving a joystick around or something. But it's always been auto-firing, and I love that the writers are just totally aware of that and just throw that out there to again deconstruct how awesome it is when you're firing the phasers and torpedoes. Actually, you just kind of select the targets and tell the computer to take care of it. But there's a little button to tell it to start taking care of it. So again, deconstructionist, but in an enjoyable, fun way that shows they've done their homework.
Yeah, that's an analysis of the episode that I hadn't considered. But now that you bring that up, multiple examples within this episode, I'll start looking for that in future installments. I like the writing. I like a lot of the things that the Hagen brothers seem to be doing, and their approach to Star Trek. But I don't know if there's anything else. That's kind of our resolution. Is what the climax of the story is. Dow learns that it's okay to ask for help. He doesn't really do much. He, I guess, takes credit and thinks that he's still the good captain, the good leader, because eventually he did ask for help. And Janeway gives the kids some inspirational advice at the end, and I think here is another example of this. Janeway's got to be a little sharper than she's letting on, because she said, I've seen my share of wayward crews, and I can tell you that you've got potential. If this Janeway has memories and experiences and stuff, I think that she probably has the original Janeway's memories, programmed into her, or at least the encyclopedia version of that stuff, and has a little bit of self-awareness where she can have her own opinions.
Yeah. And I mean, we were accidentally getting quite a few sapient holograms during the DS9 Voyager era. So who knows? They might just be everywhere. I mean, I think they are everywhere, because we find out that they're putting them to work in mines or stuff, rather than just deactivating them. So they clearly consider them kind of sapient. So yeah, the idea that she's, significantly surpasses the original boot up sapience of Doc Holodeck from Voyager is certainly very plausible. Makes perfect sense that she would actually be the next step in that. And I don't know if they probably would have just uploaded all of the logs, maybe even the personal logs, if Janeway was okay, real Janeway was okay with it, to give her a field of personal experience to help her interact with people.
Yeah, and that definitely seems to be what Zimmerman did to create the EMH. He put a lot of his own memories and his own personality into it.
Yeah, and what Ira Graves had kind of invented that tech back in season 2 of the Next Generation?
Season 2, yeah. The Schizoid Man.
Yeah, so they were basically had it as a prototype back then, so it's probably not all that hard to do more than just feed it the logs by this point, even if so that could help explain why so much of Janeway is going to be in this hologram here. It would be fun if she keeps slipping up and calling herself Admiral. Because she's some part of her hasn't quite that's just how she would have said it. But oh yeah, I'm not actually an admiral, so
Now, the one thing that confused me here was Jenkum Pog says that he just wants to start by learning how to turn left or right. Like, that'd be helpful if we know how to steer the ship. But they were doing some pretty advanced maneuvers when they were escaping Dreadnought last week. So I think they know how to turn left and right.
Again, they could have just told the ship, fly down there and don't hit anything, and the ship's computer is doing all the turns, and they literally don't know how to fire the port and starboard thrusters to turn the ship left or right. They have to rely entirely on the ship's computer and explaining what they want, and then the computer figures out how to do it. So that could make some sort of sense of that statement. So
well,
a mechanical device sensitive to light.
Sorry, computer, stop.
Your holographic interface training program is speaking to you.
Yes. So,
well, our Hollow Nanny in the live audience is telling us not to forget about the Diviner and Kitten scenes.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. We do see a little bit more of Tars Lamora, which, by the way, it was pointed out to me that if you rearrange the letters in Tars Lamora, it spells star amoral. So it's like, oh, this is like the unethical star, where the bad guys live.
Amoral star. So.
But yeah, the Diviner he's out of his tank. He is gearing up, strapping on his armor, and has Dreadnought at his side. He says, "Prepare the Rev 12," which I guess is the name of his ship. It kind of sounds like a car. Isn't it like a Toyota has like a RAV4 or something? But we see Cation Kitty again.
There was my wife's favorite part. So.
Toiling away under the cruelty of the Diviner. But yeah, it looked like that whole like main complex is kind of like the capital city looking thing. It's very Halo 4 or like Tron Legacy style graphics, but that whole facility, that whole building, that whole structure, I guess, takes off and is the ship, the Rev 12. And what I thought was interesting is that they can cloak their mining asteroid. They activate the Chimerium cloak, so you can use that stuff with cloaking technology. Can he cloak his ship or just the asteroid? Because it kind of seems like it'd be easier to cloak a smaller thing than a bigger thing.
Yeah, I would. I mean, if you have the technology, I mean, it could be that he only bought one cloaking device, and so he can only cloak the thing the device is plugged into. But it could also be that he's advanced enough to purchase or construct multiple cloaking devices. We don't quite know how he fits into the industrial infrastructure of this area of space.
My thinking is that when he takes off in his big ship, he kind of leaves his base defenseless. And so that's why he cloaks it to hide it, so that no one like tries to go conquer it and take all his Chimerium. But then I'm like, don't people know where it is? Like that Kazon trader was like bringing them prisoners. Like that guy knows how to get there, even if it's cloaked. Or can it move? Can it travel?
If you mounted some thrusters on it, you wouldn't have to move it more than a few hundred kilometers, and which you could do in a matter of hours. Yeah, just you wouldn't have to even do something as elaborate as when they moved DS9. Just shift it a few dozen kilometers, and if it's a really good cloak, no one's going to find it because it's not where they're looking for it, and space is vast. But you would need some thrusters. Otherwise, you could just extrapolate its vector from last time you visited and figure out where it should be now. If it has no thrusters, the cloak is of marginal usefulness.
It does end the episode on an ominous note. John Noble is really scary, like his voice, when he's saying stuff like, "I am coming for you, my progeny." I'm like, oh yeah, he's got like a great villain voice, almost to the point where he seems too like cliche evil. But they did kind of hint at some nuance with him in the first episode, and I think outside of the show, I've heard like the writers talk about like, oh yeah, like when you learn what he's all about, like you'll understand, why he's trying to do the things he's trying to do.
Yeah, I hope they do something more with him, but they probably will.
The answer to the question we had was like, were they gonna like come after the Protostar? And it's like, oh well, they answer that pretty quickly.
Yes.
What were you gonna say though?
They go from this really ominous music to this incredibly chill, surprisingly chill credit sequence that after everything else of the show is so high energy, we get these very meditative, calming credits that I was like, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of jarring. Oh, and the cool thing, Brian, they're doing with the music for Prodigy is that they're releasing the soundtrack to each episode every week. I listen to the Star Trek music on Spotify. So I don't know where else you can find it, but I know if you have a Spotify subscription, that's one way to find it. And every week there will be new Prodigy music to listen to, and it has a really good score.
I guess I have to admit I wasn't paying too much attention to the music outside of the opening and closing credits, but I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah, it's pretty energetic throughout, though. Like you were saying, like it's almost kind of surprising to hear it without the context of the show, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's like some really like energetic stuff. Like the lighthearted parts are like super lighthearted, the actiony parts are super actiony.
Yeah.
So not very subtle, but I like it.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything else to say on this episode. I don't have any final thoughts, but Brian, if you do, please go ahead and share with us.
Yeah, this is something that I think it vaguely hit me a few months ago, but I wasn't sure how true it was going to be until I saw the actual show, and as opposed to just guessing what's going on from trailers. This is all just Blake 7.
Okay, you have to explain, because and I'm sure many listeners, I know of Blake 7 because of you, but otherwise I have zero exposure to it. So tell us what Blake 7 is.
A bunch of freedom-loving prisoners, a mismatched band of people who shouldn't be friends and really want to hang out with each other because they're all so different, are all prisoners of the evil bad guy, and they all want to be free, and they stumble across a super awesome, mysterious alien spaceship. And then they end up being pursued by the authorities who had imprisoned them in the first place, who want the ship. And the ship itself turns out to be alive and has like a sapient computer that they can talk to and has access to vast amounts of information. Yeah, that's Blake 7. The Blake 7 also has a telepathic crew member and a gentle giant who isn't all that educated. Is huge. I'm kind of wondering, are we going to end up with a bunch of space Robin Hood hijinks, which is kind of what the meat and potatoes of that show was, where they'd run around screwing over the evil Federation. That's literally what they called it in Blake 7, was the Federation. But it was evil. The evil authoritarian dictatorial Federation. They'd steal, knock out, raid their stuff, very Rebel Alliance-y, Robin Hood-y type stuff. So I'm wondering if that's where we're going to end up with this show. Is it going to be about them being on the run and exploring, or is it going to be about them kind of kicking the bad guy's ass and liberating lots of other people and stuff as we adventure, given the other similarities between this and Blake 7. And I don't say this to be critical. I love the setup for Blake 7. I think it is one of the shows most dying to be rebooted out there. So I'm very glad that somebody's taken up this idea that I've always loved and is having fun with it.
That actually sounds really cool. Like Robin Hood in space kind of makes me want to watch Blake 7, because I don't know anything about it beyond the few things you've told me over the years.
I will warn you, the actors, most of the actors are amazingly fun and kind of dark and cynical. It's definitely a much more adult show than Doctor Who is.
It's also British, right? Like
British,
Doctor Who.
Yes, made by the BBC. In fact, you can see some of the Doctor Who props and costumes show up in there. I will say their production budget is a little less than 1970s Doctor Who.
Yikes!
So not wildly less, but you definitely need to know that going in, that the sets, the costumes, the aliens and stuff are going to be not quite as good as 1970s Doctor Who. But if you're willing to go with that, the characters are quite wonderfully fun in a kind of black humor kind of way sometimes. I highly recommend it if you're at all curious. So, but much more cynical than Doctor Who. So.
Very cool. Well, yeah, we'll have to see if the show takes a similar approach in the future. In the meantime, though, I do have the Gorn eggs section of the show to go through. These are all the Easter eggs, in jokes, and continuity connections in the episode that I thought were worth mentioning. But yeah, starting off, we do have the Federation, or the Federation, as Rock Talk said. That's one of those most coming me roll my eyes. But yeah, the Federation history lesson. We see the visual representations of a Tellarite, Vulcan, human, and Andorian. So all the founders of the Federation. We see like their flags or banners or logos or whatever you want to call them. And we also see the ships of like every Star Trek show that takes place before Prodigy. We have the TOS Connie, we have the Galaxy class from TNG, the Voyager or Intrepid class, we have the Defiant class, NX class, and a Crossfield class like the Discovery. And a couple of shuttles. I guess it's a Class F and a Type 6 and a Type 8 shuttlecraft. So it's like the Hollow Janeway knew to only show the ships that have had their own TV show.
There's a reason she's Starfleet's most decorated captain.
And then Aaron's asking why was the Discovery in there, and I'm like, yeah, I guess people just know that like there was a cross-filled design. I don't know how much they buried about the Discovery, or if that had been unearthed by this time. And next up, we get to see that cool map that, like you said, Brian, does establish the existence of the Beta Quadrant as well as the Alpha Quadrant, and has the Federation labeled as existing in both. And we also see the Romulan and Klingon empires. So that was cool.
Yep, all dating back to Jeffrey Mandel's Star Charts book. So as far as positioning of things, so
yeah, and you even can see some of the sectors have familiar names that have been used in some of the star charts and stuff like that. Dal accuses Gwen of having space madness or space flu. And I think space madness was mentioned in the original series in the Naked Time, and then again in the Tholian Web. So like that's what happened to the crew of the Defiant and the Tholian Web.
I absolutely would have slipped in. She accidentally saw our Medusan and she's crazy.
Yeah, I would have liked that. But speaking of Gwen, she uses the curse word Quavoth, which but that's what she says when all the escape pods are gone. That's a word that I think the only other time it existed in Star Trek was Martok said that once in Deep Space Nine. I don't know what it means, and I found some conflicting Klingon definitions online. So,
but it is Klingon then, okay.
Yeah, so she knows Klingon language. Well, she was studying it last week with Acacian. That was Klingon text. Yeah. So that's another Alpha Beta Quadrant species that has interacted with these Delta Quadrant characters. Of course, we have the hologram Janeway. I loved this touch. I think I'd seen an image of this somewhere, but the hologram Janeway drinks coffee.
Yeah.
So clearly has a lot of the Catherine Janeway real life personality and mannerisms built in. Janeway was a famed coffee addict in Voyager. I liked her having her coffee black. It's kind of like her alternative to Earl Grey tea hot.
I that was another point for Janeway's a little more clever than we think of, is that she knows to show up with the coffee just to rub in how they should have been listening to her. You know, look at it, I've got this so under control. You got, that's a bit of, symbolic thinking that goes beyond a lot of stuff that we normally see from more primitive AIs. So.
And I don't know why I wanted to point this out so much, but on one of the displays for the Prodigy that we see, it has labeled Work B storage. So, well, I guess they don't store shuttles. They just replicate a shuttle whenever they need one, but they can keep some smaller Work Bs around. I want to see the Protostar Work Bs, but yeah, we never really get a good look at them. You see them a little bit in the motion picture. a little bit in the background, and the Deep Space Nine opening credits flying around. The work bee that we see the most of up close is the Discovery one. When they're like fixing the satellite in the first episode.
Yeah. That's the schematic of the ship. Again, it looks like about 7 or 8 decks, because we can kind of see the floor of the bridge pretty clearly there, and you can, if you assume that all the decks are as tall as the bridge is, or something close to that, you can see that there's a fair number of decks there. So this ship it's not small. It's by Star Trek standards, I guess it's small, but I think it probably has more volume than the Defiant at this point.
Yeah, so it's a little bigger than I thought previously.
Yeah. But yes, and nice. What are they called? MSDS?
Yeah, Master System Display.
Yeah, nicely done graphic there. Even if it doesn't show the floors quite as clearly as I would like, it also looks like a whole lot of it is kind of looks more like it's hardware. So maybe that could help explain the everyone sleeps in a cargo bay is the
it looks like there's a bunch of like engineering equipment and stuff in here. This is gonna be where that third nacelle pops out.
Yeah.
So of course that's gonna take up when you suck that thing inside of your ship, it's gonna take up a lot of volume.
Yeah, but there seems to be a lot more than just that going on in there too. So I mean, I don't know how seriously we should take this graphic. They could have just put some gibberish in there to fill it out, but it would imply that their engineering hall is literally filled with engineering stuff, completely unlike, say, every other engineering hall we've ever gotten a detailed look at in Star Trek, which is mostly rooms and corridors.
Michael Stapniak in our live audience says he was hoping for a rubber ducky room. So we might see another display that has the rubber ducky room.
Yeah, that could be. It should be easier to spot, because if it's the same size duck they had on Picard's Enterprise, it should be really noticeable on these displays.
Well, that's it for the Gorn eggs, but I do have some subspace transmissions. Last week I asked people what did they think of the premiere episode of Prodigy, Lost and Found, and I'm just going to go over some of those right now. But our OSHA and safety enthusiast, Captain Pikachu, said last week, maybe lacking in seatbelts, but certainly not lacking in stunning visuals and a lot of heart and fun. But let's hope for more seatbelts so we can also teach the next generation to not commit more OSHA violations. I mean, all the seatbelts were on Gwen, clearly, when they had her strapped down. So, also on Twitter, JC says, my 9-year-old brought it up last weekend and I was ecstatic. While he commented it had Star Wars Rebels vibes, he gave it a 9 out of 10 and has decided he is a Trekkie like his dad. I loved it myself, and even more so with my youngest. I think that is super cool. 3s and 7s. That's awesome. And Angela said something similar. She said on Twitter, my son is autistic and rarely watches TV. He sat with my daughter and I for the entire episode, didn't interrupt at all, and afterwards asked how soon we could watch the next one. We were completely mesmerized. So that's awesome. I hope you enjoyed this episode too, Angela. And on YouTube, Red Ketchum said, so far, so good. And has anyone asked if Murph could have been a crew member of the Protostar? The ship traveled so fast it turns you into goo instead of a 4-legged catfish. So another Murph theory. There we go.
All right, that is the definitive ending that I want that I want for this show. This is what they should do. It should all be a giant. Smurf should be the even further evolved version. If they'd left those 2 salamanders on that planet for another few weeks, they would have turned into Murphs. So yeah, I love that. That's brilliant.
That's going to be it for this week. I would love to hear what people thought of this episode, Starstruck. So be sure to comment on YouTube, hit me up on Twitter, however you want to get a hold of me, send us an email, and let us know your thoughts on Starstruck, and we might share those next week when we cover the next episode of Prodigy. Until then, though, there is more streaming action on YouTube if you're checking us out live right now on Friday night, because Starfleet Boy is gearing up for the Starfleet Boy After Dark show that is going to start streaming. I'm going to assume 10 o'clock Eastern. Starfleet Boy, let me know in the live chat if that's right or wrong. But I'm not sure what they're going to be talking about over there. Oh, he says in about an hour, so that's going to be 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central. I'm about to go see the Eternals if they're still streaming when I get out of the theater, which is going to be super late because it's an incredibly ridiculous long movie. But
it would be rather silly if a movie called The Eternals was short.
I suppose. But yeah, I might be able to give my reaction to that. And there's going to be a lot of other cool stuff. I think Boat Wreck is going to be around. So check out Starfleet Boy After Dark. And until next week, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fathery on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.